So today I want to share a story, a personal story that recently happened to me that really drove home the realization that going through difficult times, traumas, things that just would normally be life changing, going through those most difficult things that we all attempt to avoid really does lead to you becoming not just more resilient, but it really changes your life when you recognize the difference in how you react now to certain things versus maybe how you would have reacted in the past, and how the experiences kind of stack on top of one another until you get to a point where you're just at peace pretty much no matter what. So the story begins way back when I joined the military. I joined the Air Force. Now, I did not join because I had a hyper vigilant sense of defending the country and all of that. I'm not going to sit here and say that that's why I did it. There were two reasons I joined. Number one, my brother from another mother who was 3, 4 years older than me, he had already joined the Air Force, and I had heard good things from him. And the second thing is that my home life just wasn't going to work. It wasn't objectively horrible. It was just a matter of a clash of personalities between me and my parents. They are very, especially my father, very, very old school, very stuck on the tunnel vision of the only way to be successful is to do well in school, go to college, get it. You know the deal, right? And it just wasn't going to work for me. I just never got along with school whatsoever. So I joined the military. Now, the hardship experience I had in the military really only centered around basic training. And it wasn't necessarily what you would normally think. Sometimes guys go into the military and they're just shocked at the treatment you get at basic training with the TIs yelling and screaming at you and everything like that. And some guys just can't handle it. My circumstance was a little bit different. I didn't get it. like it never sunk in. Like when the TIs would give me shit, oh well, you're from Miami. Oh, you must have drugs. I remember when we first got to basic training and they have us all lined up outside the dorms at like 3:30 in the morning. And my recruiter had not done a good job. He had not prepared me whatsoever for what to do. And so let's just say I had too much luggage, right? I had brought too many things with me than I really should have. And so the instructors thought that I had, of course, they didn't really think this, right? But they played it out as though, oh, here I was, this guy with long hair from Miami. I must have bags full of drugs. So they made a whole big deal out of taking apart my bags and going through it, looking for cocaine and all of that stuff. And I wasn't scared. I was more just, I was confused and annoyed. I it didn't take on me. I didn't understand why everybody else around me was like, oh my God, they were scared and they thought I was going to go to jail. My attitude was just kind of like, what are you idiots doing? Now, of course, it's basic training in the military. So I can't look at the instructors and say, what are you idiots doing? But that's what was going through my head. And that perspective never really changed the entire time we were there. I would see guys getting screamed at for having a little bit of toothpaste on the cap of their toothpaste and things like that. And they came after me a couple of times. But after about a couple of weeks, long story short for this part is I had a discussion with one of the drill instructors, and I asked for permission to speak freely, and he gave it to me, and I just let it out. Basically, I was like, look, man, I'm going to go along with everything you guys are going to do here. I'm not going to cause any problems. But this stupid shit where you're yelling and screaming at everybody, trying to get them to man up, like it's just not going to work on me. So like, just let it go. Go pick on somebody else. And it wasn't that I wasn't willing to do what they were telling me to do. It didn't didn't work in my head. You just ask me what you want. Just tell me what you want me to do. So for the rest of the basic training, I kind of had to develop this. I don't know exactly the word to use, but it was basically I had to fix my attitude when they would ask me to do things in a certain way because they couldn't treat me any different, right? They had to still yell and scream at me like everybody else. And so I was like, okay, here we go. All right, here we go. And so I developed a mechanism to deal with those things. I developed a mechanism of how to handle it when I had to do something I really didn't want to do. And that has served me later on in life. Okay. So now, fast forward all the way through my life. I really, up until 2024, other than having to put a few dogs down, separated out. All my dogs, the dogs that I had previously had, died years apart. Other than that trauma, I've had a good life. I haven't lost any. My parents are still alive. My grandparents obviously passed on. I've been blessed in what I've been able to do for a living and be home with my kids and never. I had to work hard, but I've never really struggled. And then in 2024, the shit hit the fan, for lack of a better phrase. So everything happened to me all at once. Now, if some of you know this, I run a hockey channel for the Florida Panthers, not for the Florida Panthers, but centered around the Florida Panthers. In March of 24, right before the Panthers were getting ready to go into the playoffs, my dog Ellie died. And then over the subsequent 3 months that followed, 3, 4 months that followed, my Saint Bernard Fluffy, his health rapidly declined. He checked out as soon as his sister died, and then he passed. Now, at the same time this was going on, the Panthers were on their way to running through the playoffs and winning the Stanley Cup. Now, here's where the military training came in. For the last 2.5 to 3 months of Fluffy's life, we were trying to get him to just, slow down and naturally pass on his own. Well, he refused. And what I ended up going through those last couple of months, while at the same time that we were streaming, my son and I were streaming all the Panthers playoff games of other teams. We were working every night. Um, I would I ended up having to sleep downstairs with Fluffy because he could no longer get up the stairs. And progressively, obviously, things got worse. And we do our stream, and I'd be done with my hockey work. That's Leia readjusting herself on the bed. We would do our stream. I would finish up with all the hockey work. You're killing me. Now I gotta edit this. She don't know what to do with hers. I gotta let her out. Hold on. And so here's where the military training came into play without me really realizing it at first. The last couple of months, the routine was we'd stream a hockey game, I'd do my recap, I'd be done about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. Everybody else would go to bed, and I'd stay downstairs with Fluffy. And he was obviously becoming very needy. And so I tried to fall asleep in my chair at 11 o'clock. And by 12:30, he'd be whining, and I'd have to come lay on the floor with him. And then as things progressed, I was sleeping more and more on the floor. And what the other thing that was happening was it was too hot for him to go outside during the day because he insisted on, I've got about an acre that's fenced in, and he insisted on going potty at the end of the fence. He wouldn't go near the house. So it would take, sometimes he'd get me up at midnight and we'd be outside till 3, 4 in the morning because it would take him that long to get out to the end of the fence, do his business. And then, because he would walk a little bit and then stop and just want to sit and chill and relax. And so I was up with him all night. And during those 3 or 4 hours, I wasn't awake the entire time. I would bring out a chair. I would bring out my folding chair, and he'd do his thing. He'd walk however long he wanted to walk, and then he'd lay down, and I'd get him wet. I had a bucket of water that I was following him with, and I'd get him wet so he'd be comfortable because it was still warm outside. And I'd doze off in my chair for 5 minutes, 8 minutes before he'd want help to get back up to start walking back in little by little. Sometimes it'd be 15 minutes. I'd get sleep. So I wasn't getting any sleep. This is not sleep, right? And the I can still remember the number of times when I would when it would initially happen, when we'd still be inside and I'd be in my recliner and I'd finally have fallen asleep after the hockey game. And he'd wake me up, I'd hear him whining, and I remember cautiously the feeling of having to get up out of the chair when I'm just dead tired. There's no energy in me. I'm just so exhausted. That feeling, I remember using the same technique that I used to get through basic training in the Air Force. I remember feeling and thinking to myself, if I could do that, right? If I could get through what I went through in the military, if I could get through that, I can get my ass up out of this chair and go be with my dog. And so obviously that progressed to the point where he finally passed in first week of July. And then before I even knew what had hit me, because remember, I just lost one dog, the Panthers won the cup. So I was down because the one dog had died and down because Fluffy was dying, but on camera, pull. I had to pull energy from places I just didn't know where I was getting that energy from to be the cheerleader for the team, so to speak. Then as soon as the camera was off, I was back to dealing with reality. And I pulled from a lot of my experience in the military. That's really how I got through. And so eventually Fluffy passed the first week of July. And before I even knew what had hit me a few weeks later, my girlfriend who had been with me for 6 years and living with us, she just left. She just left. And so in the space of 4 months, I had lost both dogs and gone through the loss of a relationship while also going through the Panthers winning the Stanley Cup for the first time. So to say that I was emotionally exhausted would be a massive understatement. But I know specifically that the mental toughness, the fortitude that I developed in the military is what got me through those 4 months. Now, that's not the end of the story. Now, since then, it's been 2 years. It was actually 2 years, a few days ago, that Fluffy passed. Since then, I have a new girlfriend. She lives with me. Everything is fine. But I have consistently said when things have come up that other people are worried about, I've kind of had not a laissez faire attitude, but I've kind of had the attitude of, hey, look, man, it's like they took both my dogs in relationship within the space of 4 months. It's like, what more is life going to do to me? Now, I understand that a loss of a child would be worse. My parents will eventually pass, but everybody expects at some point their parents to pass. And so I've kind of had a I don't want to call it an attitude, but a perspective of, look, man, at this point with what I just went through, but I'm good. Like if something happens that would normally be a big trauma, I'd be like, well, life just keeps on going. But I haven't had an opportunity until recently to test that theory. And last week, something happened in my life that absolutely tested that theory and also showed me the big difference between myself and my father. And it brought me all the way back to why I joined the military in the first place. So it kind of connected itself. So I'm not going to drag this part of the story on because it's not relative. But what happened last week, long story short, is found out that my ex-wife, who is, we'll just call her the poster child of the bitter ex-wife, okay? Both of my boys have autism. Kyle is very high functioning. You would barely know it. Matthias is a different case. I have Kyle. She has Matthias. And long story short is that she manipulated Matthias to the point where he changed his last name to hers and no longer has my last name, which is obviously my father's last name. And it didn't affect me. Not because it didn't bother me or because I didn't feel anything, but because that exact mechanism that I've been talking about all this time, saying, look, man, they took both my dogs and my relationship in 4 months. It's like, if something happens, like, it absolutely, the experience of having had that happen, the experience of losing my dogs like that, and sleeping on the floor with him every night, and being rah rah on camera for everybody else, and then as soon as the camera is off, laying on the floor with him, hoping that he would pass. The experience of being able to get through that. When this thing happened with Matthias, do I like it? No, no. Now, my father, who has probably never had a self reflective moment in his life, will just say he lost it. He's made some comments and some threats that not is not good. It's and it's understandable, right? He's going to be 80 years old. This is his name. My mother and father have never done anything but treat even my ex just like family, regardless of behavior. But I find myself in the position now of I I I know the previous me before my dogs passed like that, before all of that happened. I know I would have been right there with my father, just absolutely being unhinged, absolutely unhinged. And of course, I would have felt justified, and some people might say I was justified. But I don't know the words to use to describe it other than, man, life is just going to life. And I know that a lot of times we go through things we try to avoid. We try to avoid going through the traumas that will eventually come for us anyway. Um, but if you go through them, many times you're going to find, almost invariably, you're going to find that if you just put your head down and go through that moment, and don't think about what you're going through. Don't think that, why is this drill instructor yelling at me? This is stupid. It's just like, no, I'm just gonna march. That's what I have to do right now is march. You don't think about it. You don't think, you know, every night I'm up all night with my dog and he's dying. Is no, just think, get up out of the chair and go lay with your dog. Don't don't think about the how hard it is. Just block that part out. Now, later when you're done, you can, woo, boy, that was difficult. That was not easy. But as you do that, as you learn the ability to block out how hard you think something might be, when things come like what just happened with my son, they're just going to bounce off for you. They're absolutely just going to bounce off you. It doesn't mean you don't have the feelings, and it doesn't mean that you're bottling them up. It just centers your reaction, and it puts you in more control over your reaction. And then, so when I saw my reaction and I saw my father's reaction, and I looked at the difference, and his reaction to that happening reminded me of why I joined the military in the first place, which then set my head going, I'm noticing this because I reverse engineered why I was handling this so much better than him. And the irony being that when you reverse engineer why I'm handling it so much better, it's because he would fly off at the handle so much when I was a kid that I had to join the military. And then the rest of the story progresses to now where he's still flying off at the handle and I'm calm and centered because of the choices that I made. Because when I was a kid, he would fly off the handle. So, the best advice I can give you here to summarize all of that is, man, life is just going to happen. And the harder that you fight against what is happening in your life, the worse off you're going to be. Now, do I like that this happened with my son? Of course not. Is there anything I can do about it? No. He's his own person. Now, he feels it was his choice. We all know how this works with my ex-wife. Okay. And I'm not even going to get into that. But the point of the video was that when you're faced with these situations, man, don't focus on how hard it is. Don't focus on how difficult something might be. You won't get through it. And if you do, you're going to have a lot of anger and anxiety built up because of the mental state you put yourself in of, man, this is so hard. I'm having such a difficult time getting through this. Like, wait, put those feelings of difficulty aside and just feel like, okay, you know what? This is happening for a reason. And it's not always, it's not always, well, this is happening for a reason because it was Fluffy's time to die, right? Sometimes, a lot of times, most of the time, all of the time, you're going through something because it's preparing you for something that's coming next. And I have no doubt that had I not gone through that with the dogs, my reaction to this name change would have been quite possibly life changing for everybody because, the apple don't fall that far from the tree. And that ability to significantly overreact that my father has, it's still inside me. I grew up watching it and grew up wanting to make sure that I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that guy. So when you're faced with these things, and just what they say is true, just put your head down and do it. Okay. If it's something that it's unavoidable, you can't fight it off anymore, or you know that it's got a finite amount of time, like basic training. It's only going to be 8 weeks. It's just put your head down and do it. The dog was dying. It was going to be over. You just put your head down and do it. And then when the next thing comes, you'll be that much stronger to deal with it, and you won't take as much energy. It won't take as much energy. You won't be as exhausted from having to do it, and you end up with a hell of a lot more of a peaceful life.